Hello and welcome. My name is Eric Osborne. I am super happy to be here with you today. This presentation is one that I have given multiple times, and it's really a great joy to give, mostly to live audiences. This is a little bit different of a format. We did do a live recording, but the technical issues mandated that we re-record and edit. So here we are. I'm so happy to share this though with our members and the general public. This is some extremely, I believe, very important information to consider as psilocybin becomes more mainstream, and particularly as it is more and more viewed as a mental health breakthrough. What you're going to see through this slideshow presentation is that psilocybin mushrooms are so much more than that. They have been with us since our earliest records, and they will be here long after we are gone. They are a powerful, powerful, sacred tool that has many wonderful benefits that we are just starting to realize. So let's get started. All right, what's really going on with psilocybin? That's what everybody wants to know. But perhaps we have to admit that we don't know. Because as we study the science, as we look into the inner workings of the mind and the neurochemistry, we're understanding to an extent what's happening with psilocybin and the brain. Psilocybin, as you may know, is an analog to serotonin, so it fits nicely into serotonin receptors, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor. There are many other serotonin receptors, though, that are not affected by psilocybin, and there are many other compounds that are in psilocybin mushrooms that influence the experience, not just psilocybin. Also, psilocybin receptors are all over the body, and we have just been studying psilocybin's impact on the brain. Based on my 25 years of experience, I feel very strongly that we are going to come to understand that psilocybin experience is a whole body, an entire nervous system experience. There's so much to explore here, and we are just scratching the surface. It's also important to remember, and those who consume many, many mushrooms over the years eventually come to this understanding that we don't know what's going on generally with existence. We're studying how psilocybin works within the brain, but we really understand very little about the brain. So, beginning from the premise that we really don't know what's going on is one of the most important perspectives that we can take so that we can stay open-minded and be aware that there is new information that will likely change our perspective. You've seen this over time. Every scientific field, every new discovery, we initially believe that we understand what's going on, and then time passes and more studies are done, and we come to realize that we really have just scratched the surface. And I promise you, that's what we've done with psilocybin, which is excellent in my opinion because it forces us to really ask bigger questions, which is what the mushrooms do generally. One of the reasons why I loved mushrooms, not just psilocybin mushrooms, but mushrooms overall, is because they have forced me personally to ask bigger, more difficult questions about the nature of our ecosystem, about the interactions of different organisms, about the life cycles of these plants and animals, and just so much more. Psilocybin itself, though, you can just imagine the questions that come out of a psilocybin experience. And as we start to explore the mushrooms themselves, we begin to ask bigger questions about their nature. One of the first questions, though, that I really think that we should be asking as we explore the nature of the mushroom and how it interacts with human psychology, spirituality, physiology, is are we even looking in the right place? Is really the place to study psilocybin in the laboratory? My belief is that it's not. Now, we're going to not really be discussing so much the experience of psilocybin in this conversation. What I'll be sharing with you is more of the historical perspective. And yet again, this is an instance of where we're probably not looking in the right places for the information. We look to cultures immediately before us, to an extent. You know, there's a lot of conversation within the psychedelic wellness movement about honoring the indigenous who carry the medicines forward, and yet we seldom seek their counsel. We often dismiss the beliefs that arise out of those cultures, the spirit world, things like other dimensionalities, things like other entities and other beings. But I suspect if we harken back to our ancestors, that we will come up with better questions and actually more conclusive understanding to what we're experiencing today. So I want to try to build a bridge. I mean, the mushrooms are the bridge, but I want to highlight this bridge between our oldest ancestors and our modern experiences that still baffle our minds. This painting here you see on the cave wall here, this is the one of the oldest cave paintings known. It's estimated around 12,000 years old. You can absolutely see psilocybin mushrooms here. These are almost phenotypically identical to Psilocybe similensiata. You can see the stems on some of these mushrooms are depicted as kind of wavy, squiggly stems, I call them, with a perfectly conical cap. This is almost an exact representation of Psilocybe similensiata. It's the only mushroom that I know of, period, much less psilocybin mushroom, that has this undulating stem. And also, it does grow in grasslands and pastures, like where you see the cattle at the top right. So, if we're going to start studying psilocybin, my belief is that we should start from our earliest experiential understanding, and that comes from these cave walls. Now, how we got here. We are now in 2025 is when I'm recording this video, July of 2025. This is actually the 10-year anniversary of Courtney and I arrested for psilocybin. This is my wife, Courtney Rose, here in these pictures with me. In 2015, we were arrested after a ceremony. There's a whole story that I won't go into right now. There's a podcast, multiple podcasts where we talk about this. I can post some links in this commentary if you like. But basically, up to speed here in 2025, we are living in a world where psilocybin mushrooms are still a Schedule 1 substance. When we were arrested, the sheriff that took me in told me that by the books, I could do nothing worse than rape or murder someone than having psilocybin mushrooms. Now, it was a challenge that we went through all that, and it really it was initiation. It was an initiation to stepping into this faith. I have been working with psilocybin personally since 1999. The very first mushroom experience I had was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. And from that day forward, I have continued to work with them regularly. As a matter of fact, that day I consumed, or that time I consumed mushrooms 3 days in a row, which I would not recommend. But it did feel like I had returned home and I didn't want to leave. So I kind of built that world around me, as you can see here. The picture on the right is Courtney and I in Jamaica, where we started the world's first psilocybin mushroom retreat, Myco Meditations. That was in 2013, shortly before our arrest, and while on probation, we continued those efforts and really brought that retreat to the world, serving well over 1,000 people, administering at least 3 doses of psilocybin to each of those people. So I have administered, as you can do the simple math, well over 3,000 doses of psilocybin. I've likewise consumed about 500 doses at least myself. On the bottom right, you can see the picture there of my mushroom farm. I did have a gourmet mushroom farm, Magnificent Mushrooms, in Paoli, Indiana, and that is where we were when we were arrested. So mushrooms have been such a deep, powerful part of my life. And it is with great joy and respect that in 2020, Courtney and I moved back from Jamaica and founded Psanctuary. Psanctuary is not the only or the first psilocybin mushroom church in the United States, but we do hope that Psanctuary is the most approachable church, the most community focused, the most engaged, the most immersive church. Because psilocybin mushrooms are so much more than just a mental health therapy. And a matter of fact, the research has shown pretty clearly that the mental health benefits come from the spiritual, mystical experience. So that's why we founded Sanctuary Church in 2025 with our good friend Athena. And we have grown to about 500 members in 2025 now. And we expect that to continue to increase. We have so many wonderful offerings, so many amazing people in our community. If you're not already a part of Sanctuary and you're interested, you are totally invited to check it out. There's no pressure, there's no dogma. I am a product of religious trauma, and so it is my deep, deep hope, faith, ambition to bring this church community into the world that really puts your personal responsibility and your personal relationship with your understanding of your creator at the forefront. This is not about what I believe or Courtney or any of our board members believe. Sanctuary is here to support you in your own personal journey with these sacred mushrooms as you come to a deeper understanding of your intersect with this amazing, miraculous, and sometimes scary creation. It's a lot like a mushroom trip just in and of itself, is it not? All right, so before religion, though, before we had the guys in dresses telling everyone else how to live their lives, we had, well, people living a lot more naturally. We had things much more decentralized, and we were much more in relationship with nature, particularly mushrooms. Now, there is substantial evidence that psilocybin mushrooms are the foundation of all religion. And that's really what I'm trying to help illustrate here is that all of the major world religions stem from shamanism, and shamanism itself was a product of uh, multiple access points to ecstatic states, but one of the primary must surely have been psilocybin and Amanita muscaria mushrooms. Now, why do we say that? Well, you can see right here again, we have multiple cave paintings that depict mushroom-headed figures. We've got the mushroom runners here. This is a an etching of a cave painting that was done by Kathleen Harrison. You can see these figures running with mushroom shaped heads, holding mushrooms in celebration, mushrooms on the ground there. The bottom right here, you see a shamanic figure holding a typical geometric spiraling pattern surrounded by entities and seems to be in his would be or her would be left hand holding a large mushroom that very much looks like an Amanita muscaria or perhaps a spaceship beaming someone up. My vote's for the mushroom, though. The center image is another one that was um, kind of brought back to life by Kathleen Harrison, found in a cave wall in Tassili, North Africa. This is often called the mushroom shaman, just generally. It's very widely known. Paul Stamets has used it in a lot of his marketing materials. You can find t-shirts and whatnot with this. The bee head on this individual is significant because we do know that mushrooms, dried mushrooms, have been and can be stored in honey for thousands of years. So it seems very likely that these individuals knew that they could store mushrooms in honey and would even perhaps dress to emulate that. I just love this picture. This is iconic. It is really points to who we are. All right, this is not some imagination. This is our ancestry inscribed on the cave walls. Again, how important must these mushrooms have been? If you have very limited time, very limited materials, you're perhaps painting by torchlight. And what do you choose to draw? Mushrooms? Well, I can tell you that's what I would choose to draw as well. Now, again, like I said, before religion, there was shamanism. All religions, every single religion originates with shamanism. You can see this chart here, the evolutionary tree of religion by Simon E. Davis. This shows us that 40 to 60,000 years ago, all human spiritual metaphysical understanding was through the lens of shamanism or animism, everything being alive, everything having spirit. That it began to evolve into other forms of hierarchical shamanism, and then those hierarchies later developed into priesthoods and segregated off into dogmatic religions. And we end up with what we have now is basically a bunch of religions thinking that they're all different when they really all, in most ways, or to the root, are all the same. I love this chart. I think it's really valuable to just consider how Human ideology branches off depending on location, depending on cultural influence, and a lot of other factors. And it makes it easy to see how the mushroom could have gotten forgotten in all of this. If you're talking 40,000 years ago, is when we began to start to record or engage consciously to our knowledge again with some manifestation of spirituality or intersect with the mystery. Um, and then, as we'll look and see through imagery throughout the slide, that around mm, 2000 BC, maybe 1200 AD, um, not too long after the death of Christ, the or the crucifixion, let's say, the um, representations of mushrooms in religious iconography really went underground. Okay, so we went from this being a very blatant part of our spirituality 12,000 years ago, let's say, moving through a period of time where mushrooms were well accepted and a known part of our intersect. And about 6,000 years ago, when agrarian society came in and patriarchal domination and much more hierarchical structuring came in, is when we start to see the um, representations begin to get more codified. They start to diminish in number. And there really seems to be a concentrated effort on keeping this knowledge secret. You will find that sacred mushrooms have been a secret for a very long time as well. It's not just coincidence that we didn't know anything about them for the last, 4 to 1,000 years of European history. This is something that uh, was really kept just to a select few across cultures, and we're going to see that as we go on. All right, so before we do go further, I want to get into the Amanita muscaria. We're not going to spend a lot of time with this mushroom because this is not one by any means that I would recommend that you consume unless you have a significant level of knowledge around it. It is toxic. This entire genus has a large number of very deadly mushrooms. Some of the most toxic mushrooms on the planet belong to the Amanita genus. Amanita phalloides is one. I'm not gonna go into all that. There's tons though, believe me. And this one here is toxic as well. If you were to eat around a dry ounce of this mushroom, 28 grams of dried Amanita muscaria, it is very likely that you would not recover. So that is considered a generally a lethal dose. I don't exactly know the LD50. A little bit of the chemistry around Amanita muscaria. So this is not a psilocybin mushroom. The active component in Amanita muscaria is muscimol. Muscimol is safe. It's good for you. It's a GABA analog. It promotes brain health, but the precursor for GABA or for muscimol in Amanita muscaria is ibotenic acid, which is deadly toxic in certain doses. Now, the human body will convert ibotenic acid to muscimol. That doesn't make it available to the consumer, which is another part of its interesting legacy, because you can actually pass that muscimol out through the body in the form of urine, and one of your friends can drink that urine and have a psychedelic trip. Now, I know that's not appealing to most. I have known some folks who have done this. I have not. I have always been the one that ate the mushroom itself. And having eaten these mushrooms in multiple forms, fresh, dried, tinctures, uh, I wouldn't, again, not encourage you to consume it. And also, I wouldn't necessarily discourage you, but what I would encourage you to do is if you are going to explore consuming this mushroom, to make sure that you are working with something that has been properly treated, something that is 100% identified. There is a company that I do endorse called Amanita everything Amanita. That individual creates some very high quality Amanita products and is very knowledgeable. What else? This mushroom, it's iconic. This is the mushroom here, right? This is the Alice in Wonderland mushroom. Um, some of the effects of it, very much unlike psilocybin. The positive effects are kind of a dreamy, clairvoyant state, where the negative effects are many. Hypersalivation, what's called fish eye, just kind of like a wobbly, whoa, eye, just the sound of fish eye, right? Who wants that? Um, like the sweating, tears, dizziness. The one time that I ate raw Amanita muscaria mushrooms, I thought for sure that I was gonna die. I did this on my own. Like this was in like 2002, maybe. It's before I had my first son, so it was like 2001, 2002. I think it's a great story. We found some Amanita muscaria for the first time while we were actually on psilocybin in the Red River Gorge here in Kentucky. Harvested them, brought them home. The next day, I had two nice mushrooms with a cap, oh, probably 4 to 6 inches in diameter on each. And just a tip, if you are ever going to eat wild mushrooms that you're eating for the first time, only eat a portion and save some of them for identification if necessary, if you need to go to the hospital or anything like that. Now, always a disclaimer I always bring to the forefront is do not eat any mushroom whatsoever unless you are 100% sure of its identification. I would even encourage that if you're buying like black market psilocybin mushrooms, and which I don't encourage you to do that. But if you are going to do that for a kind of a harm reduction, I would strongly suggest you only eat mushrooms that you can identify. You can look at them and say, okay, I know at least these are cubensis, right? Um, there are other varieties of psilocybin mushrooms that we can explore, but there are also, especially in this time when mushrooms have gained popularity, particularly in black markets, but even in above table markets, you will find people using mislabeled products. That is one of the reasons why I suggest, again, Amanita in particular, to be very safe, very selective in who you purchase these mushrooms from or mushroom products from. There have already been several companies that have been taken off the shelf because they are mislabeling. Some of them have actually even been bound to put low amounts of psilocybin into their extract just to give someone an effect and basically convince them that they got their money's worth. All right, so the I think one of the most wonderful aspects of the Amanita muscaria is its kind of how deeply embedded it is in our culture. There are a number of reference points that we can touch on to show that, but probably the most effective is Santa Claus. Some of you may be aware that the Santa Claus myth is originated in Siberian Amanita muscaria shamanism. So you can see here in the very center, this is an image of Tatiana. She is, that's how I know her, or what I've studied her. She's just called Tatiana, the mushroom shaman, the Amanita shaman. She, at the time when I was reading about her 5 or 7 years ago, she was the only remaining known, anyway, Amanita muscaria shaman. And she lived in Siberia, where this form of shamanism was active, most active, and still to some extent was at least several years ago. Now, how does Amanita tie to Santa Claus? Well, first of all, you can see Tatiana here is dressed in red and white like the mushroom. And that is typical, dressing like the mushroom itself. Now, other factors. Amanita muscaria is a mycorrhizal symbiotic mushroom that grows in relationship with pine and spruce trees. Okay, so mycorrhizal mushrooms form a symbiotic connection with various trees and plants, and they pass nutrients back and forth between each other. I want you to get a visual here. You know, pine and spruce tree, these are what we also call Christmas trees. Okay. The Amanita muscaria in Siberia fruits during the winter solstice. Okay, there are images online of this mushroom actually growing up through the snow. So you see these old postcards from the teens and 20s here showing these mushrooms with and in the snow. That is actually uh, does happen. All right. So we've got pine, spruce trees out in the forest, snow in the boughs of these trees, perhaps, or a little dusting of snow on the ground. We have a shaman who is dressed in red and white entering the forest to harvest these mushrooms. Now, get the image: Christmas tree surrounded by red, sometimes orange, sometimes yellow, sometimes even with a little purplish hue of these mushrooms that can be anywhere from the size of a golf ball to when they expand out the size of a 12-inch dinner plate. They are really majestic mushrooms. They can be. Uh, so we've got these Christmas trees surrounded by red, yellow, orange mushrooms. The red and white dressed shaman who is entering the forest with a big bag to collect these mushrooms. And when they fruit, sometimes when these mushrooms fruit by the hundreds, I've seen fruitings around pine trees here in Kentucky during August when they fruit here that are just in the hundreds of mushrooms around a handful of trees. It's quite remarkable. And you do need a big bag to carry those. Now, any good mushroom hunter knows that when you're picking mushrooms, you don't just like willy-nilly pick mushrooms up off the ground and throw them in a bag. You want to clean them in situ, so that when you do put them in the bag, they're not spreading dirt onto the other mushrooms. So if you're able to, when you're a mushroom hunter, you patiently harvest and clean mushrooms as you go. When I hunt mushrooms, what I have done to prevent damage to these mushrooms as I walk through the woods with my big bag is that I'll make piles of mushrooms and leave a pile of mushrooms here, and then I'll go collect a bunch over there and make a pile there and make a pile there. And then once I'm all said and done making my piles, I'll run through and pick them all up and throw them into my big full bag. What I have read that these Siberian shaman would do is similarly clean the mushrooms in the forest, but rather than pile them up to begin the early stage drying, which will also help to preserve the quality of the mushroom as they are transported back to wherever you're going. That the shaman would set these mushrooms in the boughs of the pine trees. So you know how the pine trees have the kind of swooping branches that are often could easily support mushrooms sitting in the trees. So again, using your imagination, we have this red and white dressed shaman figure harvesting these mushrooms from around this Christmas tree. And then once they have been cleaned, sets them in the branches of the tree to begin drying while said shaman goes around the forest collecting more mushrooms. Now step back and we see a forest full of a Christmas tree forest full of mushrooms, balls and discs of mushrooms hanging in these Christmas trees. After they're all been cleaned and picked and hung in the trees, shaman goes around with the bag, collects them all, goes back and finishes drying them over the hearth. The mushrooms were delivered to families in the area, not through a chimney, but through a snow hatch often, not always, but there is, you can even see in documentaries that have been done on this, that the yurts will have a front door and then there will be a roof door for when the snow drifts get too high. So not a far stretch from our modern chimney. The clincher, though, as if all of that wasn't enough. These shiny objects surrounding and hanging from Christmas trees, our red and white dressed shaman with their big bag harvesting. If all that wasn't enough, who else loves Amanita muscaria but reindeer? Why else would Rudolph's red be nose unless he was eating red mushrooms? This is 100% factual. Reindeer will consume the Amanita muscaria mushroom, and the shaman, it has been reported, and this is factual, would often collect the urine through the snow of the reindeer who have eaten Amanita muscaria because that can produce a psychoactive effect. What really just blew me away years ago, I saw a documentary on this that showed a Siberian shaman sitting on a reindeer skin while on a vision quest. And this individual was dressed in a red robe, sitting on a reindeer skin. And just like every shamanic culture does, has some kind of timekeeping device, some kind of rattle or bells, maybe. Well, this was the bells actually. This showed a video of a shaman sitting on a reindeer skin, dressed in red and white, and instead of having a rattle, as is customary with Western, more Western shamanism, he had bells in each hand. And so, on a vision quest, flying through the sky on a reindeer, dressed red and white, chink, 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 bells for timekeeping or for, the sounding, whatever reason we use all the reasons that we use our wonderful tools in that space. Just that image alone is enough to say, okay, well, we know where Santa Claus came from. Back it up with images like these you see on the top from the early 1900s, going back into the late 1800s, where there were images of Santa with Amanita muscaria mushrooms, with elves with Santa with Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I don't think we need to draw the connection any clearer. It is very, very obvious to me that Christianity came into Siberia, and as it did with every other pagan or indigenous religion or festival, they assimilated it and it became a Christian tradition. So Santa Claus was certainly psychedelic. We're going to move on to psilocybin species. These are the ones that most are really familiar with. These are the ones that are easy to grow. Amanita muscaria cannot be cultivated. Again, they're mycorrhizal. Psilocybin mushrooms, though, the overwhelming majority of these can be cultivated. Even Similanceata, the ones you see at the very top, and you can see the Psilocybe similanceata here with that conical cap and the again the squiggly SA or undulating stem. Excuse me. It is a rather potent mushroom that grows all across Europe and has even been reported in some northern states in the United States. Not super widely known within the psychedelic community because it doesn't preserve well. It can be cultivated, but it is a low yielding mushroom despite being very potent. At the bottom left, you see the classic cubensis. Also at the far right there with my beautiful wife Courtney, those are B plus cubensis. This is the most common psilocybin mushroom consumed, not just B plus, but Psilocybe cubensis. Any of your mushrooms that you see cultivated, the from golden teacher to penis envy, even enigma, some of these things that don't even look like mushrooms, shakti, there's so many varieties out there. These are all a variation of Psilocybe cubensis. This is a very easy mushroom to cultivate and to do genetic isolations on. It originates in dung, a subtropical species. It grows from Florida all the way down through Central America. We used to find and pick this mushroom in Jamaica to an extent, but moreover, again, cultivation is the key here. Now, in the very center, you see what is known as Psilocybe ovoidiocystidiata. There are psilocybin mushrooms that grow in wood chips, wood mulch. That's exactly what these are. These were harvested here in Kentucky in 2025. This mushroom is often exceedingly abundant. Just this year, I found roughly 50 fresh pounds just harvesting from two different locations. It was absolutely incredible. Um, I'm trying to like, there's a lot that I could say about the different species, but what I feel like it's really valuable to highlight is that, particularly in the indigenous traditions, Central America, where the longest standing psilocybin tradition still lives, it is said that various species of psilocybin mushrooms have different um, qualitative natures. Some of them are for spiritual healing, some are for physical healing, some are for direction, purpose, clarity. Uh, we don't have enough knowledge about that. Psilocybe cubensis, the one that is most commonly used in North America and really around the world now, um, is within the Mesoamerican culture is known as San Isidro, the worker's mushroom, because it is the mushroom that is gone to when someone is seeking direction in their career or their life's purpose. Having consumed and administered this mushroom, I know that they can do a lot more than that, but that does seem to be one component. Um, I will say consuming Ovoideus acidiata, which we call ovoids often, there is a different qualitative nature to that. I often say that these mushrooms are more gentle, yet more potent, and they are about 1.5 times as strong as cubensis, but they don't seem to have quite the body load, maybe. Um, anyway, that's a whole bigger conversation. We're gonna jump into some religions now. All right, so the Rig Veda, if you're not familiar, is one of the oldest religious texts. Hinduism, what is currently known as Hinduism, is the oldest organized religion. It grew out of the Vedas, the Aryan culture that kind of mysteriously came into Persia and that area. I don't know, a few thousand years ago. And with them, they brought their religion. Now, central to this religious practice was the consumption of soma. Soma was a psychedelic drink. It was not, and it's not entirely known what it was. We'll get into that a little bit more here. Um, but we do know that it was a powerful psychedelic drink. Um, Indra, the god of gods, the highest god in the Vedic pantheon, is said to have gained his power from consuming more soma than anyone. So just for a minute, sit with the reality that the oldest religion on the planet states that its highest god became that way because he could consume more psychedelics than anyone. It gives me a new love for religion anyway, you know? Um, Old Indra, who's an interesting character. So the studies of what Soma was or is have gone down many paths. There's a lot of speculation about what Soma was. Again, we do know it was psychedelic. The ninth book of the Rig Veda is written, it's like a song of praise entirely written to Soma. Soma was a plant without roots. It grew in pine forests, up on the mountains. There were a lot of qualitative depictions of it that seem to connect strongly to Amanita muscaria. And that is what R. Gordon Wasson, the founder of ethnomycology, portended in his book, The Divine Mushroom of Immortality. It's still, again, it's not been proven. There is growing speculation that Soma was actually a mixture of various psychedelic plants, that yes, Amanita muscaria would have been part of it, but also maybe psilocybin. Before we move on from here, just to highlight that Gordon Wasson is um, well, he was an investment banker that became interested in mushrooms when his Russian wife Valentina, on their honeymoon, consumed wild mushrooms. Much to his protest, he was certain that she was going to die. She didn't, and when she didn't, he became very curious as to what led to this mycophobia, this mushroom fear that the Western culture tends to have. And if you look around, you see that we are starting to become more mycocentric or mycophilic, as it's often called, lovers of mushrooms. But even still, the vast majority of people in the United States have very limited affinity or exposure to a variety of mushrooms. For instance, in Japan, it said that the average Japanese citizen consumes 7 different varieties of mushroom over the course of a year, whereas the average American consumes one variety of mushroom over the year. So there's a lot more that we've got to learn and go here in regards to our connection and love with the mushrooms. Gordon Wasson also is the gentleman who eventually, through his curiosity, was led to Maria Sabina. He wrote a life article that was published about his experiences with Maria Sabina. Um, he lied to Maria Sabina about why he was looking for the mushrooms. He said he was trying to understand where his lost son was. That wasn't the truth. He just wanted to get access to the ceremony. Um, and he made, at that time, 60,000 US for his article. And in Life magazine, which today is equivalent to about $1.5 million. Maria Sabina herself made nothing. She died actually of malnutrition. Her home was burned to the ground. Her son was murdered. Her life was just completely flipped upside down by Gordon Wasson and the effects of his article. Thousands of American tourists, thrill seekers went into Oaxaca, Huatla de Jimenez, in order to find Maria Sabina, these mushrooms. The tradition was that the shaman would never turn anyone away, and they also did not charge for their services. So you can imagine a large number of rather privileged Americans traipsing all over Central America looking for a good time, and the impact that that had on the culture. And Maria Sabina took the brunt of the blame for that, and her own people ended up ostracizing her. It's a painful and a rich story. I would encourage you to learn more about it. It is something that Sanctuary that we do not hide from the fact that these individuals, Wasson and Albert Hoffman, also the gentleman who synthesized LSD and psilocybin, um, we don't hide from the fact that these folks are not heroes. Um, it's complicated for sure, but it's a tragedy, really, the way that it unfolded. I am excited though. On July 25th of this year, we are having our third celebration in honor of Maria Sabina. So at Sanctuary, we celebrate and honor Maria Sabina with a psilocybin ceremony that we call a celebration. So if you're a member, check us out. Come and join us in one of those. We've got about 15 people on this one coming up. Very much looking forward to that. So Gordon Wasson, he did a lot of good, but he is not a hero. All right, back to the Hindus, back to the mushrooms. Uh, now, remember, we've got Indra, who is the god of gods because he could consume more psychedelics than anyone. Okay, and then within Hindu mythology, we have the sacred cows. All right, they're if you think about a cow and what it provides, typically, I mean, it's extremely valuable as food, right? Like extremely valuable as food. And yet, in this culture, in this religious religion, the cows are completely sacred and never to be eaten. Also, many of the gods, including Shiva, who you see here, are blue. Now, as we explore here, you're going to see that there's a fair amount of supposition that takes place, right? Not all of this is blatant um, depictions of mushrooms as gods or mushrooms as even sacrament, right? Some of it requires connecting dots and creative interpretation, and some of it may be completely wrong. There's no doubt, but there are some interesting coincidences here that are well worth exploring. I'm not going to get into the deeper mythology around these individuals. But we'll just highlight here that the gods were blue, like the psilocybin mushrooms. The mushrooms grow on dung. The cows, which create, are sacred. Um, and another interesting thing that I'm not sure how to like directly point to or how to connect it other than just point out that it is consistently there is that the serpent is almost always a part of this representation, right? Um, there's another component that comes in that we'll talk about down the road, but you can see here Shiva's got the cobra around his neck. You've got the sacred cow with him. You've got the god himself that is blue. If you're aware of the interpretations of Kundalini yoga, the serpent that crawls up the spine. For those who have been working with psilocybin in an energetic capacity, you may have experienced and know that psilocybin mushrooms can also themselves induce a Kundalini awakening. This awakening of the serpent at the base of the spine is how it's metaphorically described. So, before we exit Hinduism, I think it would be valuable just to look at a couple of more images here. On the right, we have Durga. Durga was a Hindu goddess of, I want to say dance. I should have looked that back up. I forgot though. Anyway, she was a primary god in Hinduism. You can see on the far right here that it looks as if she is holding a mushroom in two of her four hands. And if you look at the more center picture there, immediately left, this is again Durga, surrounded by animals and worshippers, and above her head is an absolute mushroom. That is not look like a mushroom. That is a mushroom made into a hat that she is wearing. I also thought just as worth pointing out the artwork here. It's not uncommon to see this very psychedelic artwork in Hindu mythology and representations. Just kind of like the cave paintings, right? The geometric shapes, very similar to what we experience still today when we close our eyes under the influence of psilocybin. So the artwork is something to really pay attention here too. All right, moving into Egypt. Now, I did try to have a little bit of a chronology here, but that's not always possible because there's so much overlap. But the next major culture that had a huge impact on religion, let's just say, were the Egyptians. Did the Egyptians have mushrooms? Well, Egypt wasn't always a desert, I hope you know. And also, I hope you're aware of the incredible discoveries that are coming out of Egypt. Underneath these pyramids are structures that we could have never imagined that are being revealed. Well, I'll leave that for you to go explore on your own. I will point out, though, that the image on the left here, taken from the temple of Hathor, who is also the bull goddess. Hathor was often represented as a bull. Um, that at her temple, you can see this image of mushrooms growing from a pot. Now, when I first saw this picture, I thought it had to be photoshopped. But upon digging, come to find out, it's absolutely an authentic image. What strikes me most interesting about it is that it looks almost identical to what we would call a PF Tech grow, right? Which you can see here in the center. If you're not familiar with PF Tech or a BRF grow, brown rice flour, psilocybin mushrooms are so easy to grow. Cubensis mushrooms are so easy to grow that you can grow them strictly on brown rice flour and vermiculite with spores. It is a wonderful and fascinating process that I encourage everyone to explore. Um, Once you really master this technique, then there are many other ways, more high productive ways, high yielding ways to grow psilocybin mushrooms, but this is highly effective for someone that wants to grow for personal use. So we have certain record of what look very much like psilocybin mushrooms growing from this, what looks very much like a PF Tech uh, grow in ancient Egypt at the Temple of Hathor, who was represented as a bull. Now we have Osiris, who was the god of fertility, agriculture, afterlife, death, resurrection, and vegetation, and more. He was very active god. But we also know for a fact that he was considered, you know, tangential to agriculture, god of mushrooms. Excuse me. That it was believed in ancient Egypt that the mushrooms specifically were gifts of Osiris. Worth noting that he's also connected to the afterlife and resurrection, right? Also worth noting that Osiris, who is represented in two different ways, I think that's significant. One of which, on the left here, many argue his headdress is actually a depiction of a primordial stage psilocybin mushroom. And then on the right, others suggest that this image, that is, again, this is the other common image of Osiris, a one-legged god with his arms folded and fanned out, looking like a mushroom cap. So I overlaid the image of a mushroom on here just so you kind of see that here. Um, the one-legged god thing actually also connects back to Selma. Um, I should have brought the book over here, but there is a amazing book written by Clark Heinrich, who is a Amanita expert. The book is called Magic Mushrooms in Religion and Alchemy, and he connects the story of a one-legged god with the Amanita muscaria in some culture I can't remember here, but just to point out that this is a motif of mushroom. Um, what do I want to say? I guess representation, even though it's not direct, indirect mushroom representation. It's more like codification. So, um, yeah, move on from there and have a few more images here. Inside the Temple of Hathor, we actually see an image of Hathor as the bull s- standing between two mushrooms. It doesn't get more blatant than that. Uh, Isis, so this is an image actually of Hathor with the sun disk above her head, the bull horns and the sun disk above her head. That is Hathor. And then we have her feeding the Ankh to Isis. It's so difficult to put all this in one slideshow, and even what I'm presenting to you is it's a lot. So you take a pause, take a beat, go hang out somewhere, come back and watch some more later, because we're going to keep on going for a while here. But there is ample evidence out there that the Ankh is actually an interpretation of the mushroom as well. It was connected to immortal life. It was often depicted as being eaten, and there are a number of ethnomycologists out there right now who are again strongly suggesting that the Ankh was a multi-purpose representation, and one of those was to communicate the mushroom. Another one here, one of my favorites, and I didn't point it out on the Osiris, but you can see it if you go back there, the serpent on his head. And then we have Thor here, Thoth here, who is considered the moon god, the god of magic. Moon and magic all connected to mushrooms around the world. Mushrooms have in indigenous cultures. I've heard many anecdotes of mushrooms connected to moon energy, moon magic. As a matter, even in growing mushrooms, I've had many amazing, beautiful, huge outdoor cubensis beds. And on the full moon, they are a different thing altogether. They come alive on the full moon. So Thoth here depicted with what looked to be mushrooms on the top of his head, and again the serpent as well. Now, out of Egypt, to an extent, came the Greeks and Romans. They were influenced certainly by Egyptian knowledge and wisdom. What most don't know, though, is that the Mycenaeans were the kind of proto-Greeks. Mycenae is a island or a network of islands off the coast of what is now known as Greece. It is the cultural origin of Greek culture. Mycenaeans or Mycenae is still to this day the most populated genus of mushrooms. right? Mycenae are when you see little bitty flimsy mushrooms that break real easy or dissolve in the sun, not always, but a lot of those are Mycenae species. There are actually some psychoactives, but what's most relevant here, I think, worth pointing out here is that Mycenaeans literally means the mushroom people. Okay, so the Greeks rose from the Mycenaeans. Their name means the mushroom people. Greeks themselves were quite psychedelic. We know that they had the Krikeion that was drank annually at, I believe, the Parthenon is where this was held. They had a secret ritual where every year folks would come together and consume a psychedelic drink, much like Soma. Much like Soma, we don't know exactly what it was. There's speculation that it was um, some variety of ergot fungus, which, if you don't know that, excuse me, creates LSD or LSA sometimes. Um, it could have been psilocybin. There's speculation that it was barley wine mixed with psilocybin. We don't really know. All we know is that it was a psychedelic ritual that held place once a year, and it was secret, and it was something of a death and a rebirth. Birth. We also do see this image of um, Demeter and Persephone here handing each other mushrooms, which is relevant. Now, the Romans themselves, mushroom lovers indeed. The top right image here is actually an edible mushroom, Amanita caesarea, named after Caesar, the Caesar's mushroom. This is a choice edible mushroom that is within this deadly genus of Amanita. Um, and we also understand, I didn't mention this for the Egyptians, but for the Greeks, Egyptians, and Romans, we know that mushrooms were considered a food of the gods, a food for royalty only. Um, it is believed that in Egypt in particular, there was a rule that commoners could not consume mushrooms. There is also legend that Socrates was put to death because he gave away the formula for creating the Krikeion, believing that it should be freely available to everyone. So this kind of tradition of secret knowledge around mushrooms, this tradition of mushrooms as reserved for royalty, is relevant. And we'll keep moving into the Buddhist traditions. Again, like all these slides are so limited. There's so much more that you can find out there. There's a book called, I don't remember the author, but the book's called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism. And while I haven't read it, I have listened to podcasts about it, and apparently Buddhism is quite psychedelic. That shouldn't really come as a surprise. These transcendental states that are spoken of in these ancient religions and modern religions can be accessed without psychedelics, but they can be much more easily accessed with psychedelics. This is when you start to get into the separation of the priest class from the commoners. Um, while it may be believed by the common people that the um, high ranking priests or whoever they might be attained their enlightenment strictly through discipline, artistic and archaeological evidence points to otherwise. That, yes, certainly, just as we know with integration, that you have to put into practice the wisdom that is learned from sitting with the mushroom. But it is sitting with the mushroom that the much of the wisdom comes through. It is relevant to note that in administering psilocybin, as much as I have, I've seen hundreds of people and have experienced it myself who organically, without any conscious thought, put themselves into yoga positions, put their hands into mudras, find themselves doing qigong or tai chi moves without any training. So it is suspect by many that these practices, yoga practices, tantric practices, qigong, mudras, etc., actually arose out of psychedelic experiences being integrated into daily life, and I believe that to be the truth. Now, the legend is that Buddha sat underneath of the Bodhi tree for, I think, 40 days, right? Another that 40 days comes up a lot, doesn't it? And spiritual mythology. But it said that he sat underneath of the Bodhi tree for 40 days and achieved enlightenment. Well, it's curious that we have so many very old, very, very old engravings and statues that depict Buddha sitting underneath of a mushroom. And as we look at some of the shamanic imagery coming up, we will hopefully start to understand to an extent, and I'm going to say it again, there is a wealth of knowledge to go out there and explore, but that the in multiple shamanic cultures, the mushroom and the tree are synonymous. They're interchangeable. So we have the Christmas tree that mushrooms grow from. We know that, like, we know mushroom hunters know that if you're hunting for mushrooms, then you're really hunting for the environment, which is often the tree. Um, Within this understanding or interpretation of Kundalini um, or Kabbalah. There is this depiction as the human as the tree. We have this concept of the world tree that rises from hell and stretches into heaven. So there are these consistent themes that run through various religions, all the way back from shamanism, again, from the earliest shamanism all the way up till today. We see these consistent themes, and one of them is this climbing the tree towards enlightenment, sitting under the tree for enlightenment. And interestingly enough, the mushroom and the snake seem to continue popping up. And then our most famous, at least in the West, famous story of a tree as it relates to religion. We have the story of Adam and Eve, and you all know that, right? So again, I have a picture here of this concept of the world tree. It also has overlaid with it in some um, I think this is the Kabbalah tree of life. Don't quote me on that. I should have remembered this. By the way, I'm not a researcher. I'm an explorer. I go out and find things, I bring them back, and the researchers dig into it. I didn't document any of these images. The best form of documentation that I have is actually gone. An individual who we will explore here in just a little bit, Carl DeBorgi, he had a site up called themushroomstone.com. This guy's an art historian who did wonderful, amazing work that all got stolen right out from underneath of him basically in the last few years. Quite a tragedy. I won't stay there too long, but anyway, he pointed out very effectively the relationship between the serpent, the mushroom, and another image that we may look at here down the road. Either way, we got the tree of life. Uh, it's just so interesting. Growing up Catholic and the story of Adam and Eve and the tree in the garden and taking it so literally, and then years and years studying and understanding that this tree of wisdom, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, this tree of eternal life is actually us. It is within us. We are the architecture, and that it is through descending and ascending this tree of self that we do achieve enlightenment, and that it is this serpent of the Kundalini, as it's called, that climbs up and down this tree, this energetic serpent, bringing forth enlightenment, and that consuming mushrooms can facilitate that. So let's get rolling through some of these pictures. These are some of my favorites. So, yes, yes, yes. In the beginning, there was the mushroom. And we already saw that. Cave paintings 12,000 years ago. In the beginning, mushrooms. Here we have more direct depictions of mushrooms as trees. Okay, so the one on the left, this is like, I want to say this is like ninth century here, depiction of the serpent climbing the mushroom tree and giving the apple to Eve, right? The center photo, this is like 12th century, 13th century here. This depicts Adam and Eve standing in front of what very much looks like an Amanita muscaria cap, handing each other the white, often called stars of the Amanita. There is a kind of tradition or an anecdotal mythological, it's not based in fact, kind of tale that you can lick the stars off of the Amanita muscaria and that will get you where you're trying to go. It's completely not true. But if that image is not an Amanita muscaria, I don't know what is. So two pictures at Adam and Eve, Amanita muscaria. On the right hand side here, again, we see a tree, looks kind of like a tree with some stylized amanitas growing out of the top. They actually look like a cross between a Symbolensiata and an amanita with that thin stem, the conical pointed cap, and the red and white. It's an interesting image there. The one at the top center, this is um, bronze image. I forget the year on this, when this was roughly the century on this, but it's old. Bronze image showing Adam and Eve having eaten from the tree, and the tree is right now. Look at this tree. You've got what look to be three branches of the tree. You seen that dog that Eve has there? I've never noticed that. Um, you've got these three branches of the tree, the two that come off and shoot up center and left, and then you've got this one that kind of shoots off to the right there. And that one to the right has no it has no top to it, right? It's like the cap of the tree is removed. That doesn't make sense, right? Unless that cap actually is representative of a mushroom. So the missing top to the tree itself looking very much like Liberty Caps, Psilocybe similanciata. And then just to kind of reiterate the image of the tree here, we have this top right image of Adam and Eve. This is coming out of like the 15th century. This is one of the later ones here. And the tree again itself not looking all that much like a tree, looking more like young mushrooms than a tree. Now this is where it starts to get really obscured, and I think that it would be easy to say that okay, well, it's just a stylized tree if you didn't have all of the other images that show very mushroom-like trees. And where else do mushrooms show up in the Judeo-Christian text? Well, funnily enough, with Moses. Now, this is going to take a little bit of a turn from the psychedelic, um, but I think it's really valuable to consider if we want to understand how important mushrooms have been to humanity culturally. All right, so Moses, a little bit of a backstory. This is the story of the Exodus. Moses, you may or may not know, he was adopted into the Egyptian royalty. Um, he therefore learned all of the wisdom of the Egyptian high priest. He had access to mushrooms because remember, mushrooms were for royalty, for the upper class in Egypt. So he would have had that knowledge of mushrooms. Just kind of use that as a baseline. Now, in the story, Moses decides, all right, we're getting out of here. These guys, Pharaoh's bad dude, taking my Israelite homies, and we're going out into the wilderness. I don't care. We'll die in the desert versus die in slavery, right? So they go out in the desert. They leave, and you know the story of the Red Sea and all that kind of stuff. They get out there, and they're hungry, man. They're like, Moses, you brought us out here into the wilderness to starve. What is this? And Moses is like, chill out. Tonight you'll have quail, tomorrow you'll have bread. And they're like, what are you talking about? And well, story goes, nightfall comes, a flock of quail descends on the camp, and they catch them and eat them. Sweet. They got the birds, like you said. They wake up the next day, and when they do, they find all of these white loaves all over the ground. Okay, these are white loaves scattered around all over the ground. The story says that these white loaves came with the dew and withered in the sun, and that if they sliced them and dried them or parboiled them, then they could be preserved for the Sabbath. The rule Moses gave, or God gave Moses and Moses gave them, was that you could only pick enough of the manna that you could eat for the day, except for on the eve of the Sabbath. Then, because you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, you could harvest 2 days worth, and on that Friday, as it would be, you would slice them, dry them, or parboil them. Well, some of the Israelites were greedy, as the story goes, and they collected more than they could consume for a single day. And it says when they did that, that the manna bred worms and stank. Okay, now go back to following back to when I was like 23 years old, 23 years ago. Wow, crazy. I've been doing this for so long. So, roughly 23 years ago, when I was in my very early stages of studying the mushroom and studying the Bible. I have a significant collection of scriptural text from a variety of religions here on my shelf. Um, and so when I was studying the Old Testament in particular at that time, I had begun seeing the listing of all these different plants used ritually. Cannabism is actually one of the plants that was is listed in the Old Testament, and it is now generally accepted that cannabism is the origin of the word cannabis. And we do absolutely know that cannabis was used as a sacred plant in many, many cultures throughout history. So that had me wondering, where are the mushrooms at? Well, it just happened to be that I was studying these two things and always picking mushrooms. And one afternoon, I brought in to my kitchen a big batch of fairy ring mushrooms, Marasmus aureatus, and it had been a hot day, summertime. Left the mushrooms on the table, went to my couch, rolled up a nice fatty, burned it down, fell asleep. Woke up the next day like, whoa, what happened? Well, what happened was the mushrooms on my table bred worms and stank. And when I saw that, it was like a light switch went on. I didn't realize when I'd read the story of manna that the connection there. But when I saw this flesh that bred worms and stank, it just it was undeniable to me. There had to be a connection. So I started digging a little deeper. It also says in the story that the Israelites called it manna because they didn't know what it was. All right. And from what I understand, manna is a translation of a Syrian term for mushroom. So they used a foreign word to describe something that they didn't have a word for. Factually, it's helpful to know that in this area at the bottom right hand corner, you can see Moses pointing to the desert truffle. See this small loaf looking mushroom? It's a form of puffball. Every single puffball is edible until it starts to darken on the inside, produce spores and darken. So they look so much like a loaf of bread, it's uncanny. They look so much like a yeast roll. It is, it's just, how could it be anything else? If you slice them and dry them, or if you parboil them, it will kill any fly eggs that may be inside of the mushroom that otherwise would erupt and turn to maggots within a few hours. So it's very obvious to me that the story of the Israelites and the manna is a story of the mushroom. It's worth noting that in the Ark of the Covenant, which we may touch on in a little bit here or come back to, in the Ark of the Covenant, they were commanded to store some of the dried manna for future remembrance. So mushrooms are so important to who we are as humans that they were stored in the Ark of the Covenant. It also says in the Bible and other places where this story is mentioned that the Israelites ate the bread of angels. It's worth noting that in cultures around the world, mushrooms are called the food of gods, the food of angels. In Jamaica, when we lived there, one of the first kind of insights that I had around this was that the Jamaicans, particularly the older ones, called mushrooms duppy food or ghost food or spirit food, duppy food. And of course, as we explore the Bible, we've got to come to the J Man. Time to come to Jesus, y'all. It's time to come to Jesus. I'm all about coming to Jesus when he got mushrooms. I don't know about you. But seriously, this like 10th most of the Christian art that depicts mushrooms in any way is coming from ninth to 12th century. After the 12th century, it pretty much disappears or becomes so codified that you can't see it, and then shortly thereafter, it completely disappears. Now, what about this image here? This is a painting of the Adoration of the Magi, right? So the three wise men who came to see Jesus when he was born. Um, so the Magi, this is worth pointing at here, particularly in the context of this image. So the Magi were reportedly astronomers. These were um, much like the image of Thoth, um, related to astrological magic. Um, yeah, I think we can leave that there. Now, at the very bottom right of this picture, you can see the enlargements that we did here with the screenshot. You can see at this depiction of the birth of Jesus in a very unlikely place at the foot of Mary in what looks to be a very unnatural environment. We see two mushrooms depicted, almost like Mary and Jesus themselves, right? I've never really thought about that, but the big mushroom and the little mushroom here. It looks so much like Amanita muscaria. It's just uncanny. So just to sit with that for a minute. The birth of Jesus, this artist from the 11th, 12th century found it so important to include mushrooms. I think we have to ask ourselves why. I'm also asking myself why, at the depiction of Jesus entering into Jerusalem on Good Friday, at the very beginning of his ministry, we see, I believe this was, who was the guy that helped him carry the cross? Peter? I think this was supposed to be Simon Peter. This is a mural on a cathedral wall in like Italy or something somewhere. Um, and we see this individual like holding mushrooms, welcoming Jesus, and in one hand, absolutely undeniably holding mushrooms that seem to be sprouting from a fleur-de-lis. Now, the fleur-de-lis is the other uh, image that I wanted to make mention of here because my friend Carl de Borghi, the art historian that he is and ethnomycological researcher, has all but shown, and again, his website that was uh, tragically stolen out from underneath of him. The URL was apparently stolen a few years back. Um, hundreds, so many images of sacred mushrooms depicted alongside or codified as the fleur-de-lis or in the company of serpents. So the mushroom, the fleur-de-lis, and the serpent. Carl did an amazing job of illustrating how these images are all connected with what is known as the divine rulership or the divine right to rule, the king as the son of God. without all those imagery and without being able to point you to his website, I don't see a whole lot of reason to go too deep into it, but it is quite interesting to note that these three images appear around the world, culturally uh, diverse, all over this planet, ancient art depicting the serpent, mushroom, and the fleur de lis in relationship to the divine right to rule. So, anyway, we have Jesus coming into Jerusalem on Good Friday, greeted with mushrooms growing from a fleur de lis. I don't see any way we can speculate into this being an umbrella or anything else like that. The depiction of this is so spot on with a mushroom. Don't forget Walter Ponke's Good Friday experiment either. If you don't know about that, go look it up. It's interesting. And then we have Jesus of the mushrooms. That's right. This is actually the image on the right is kind of colloquially known as Jesus of the mushrooms. This image comes from a 12th century collection of paintings that showed Jesus with a variety of plants. Um, Jesus with green, flowering, beautiful plants. There's all kinds of interesting images, and then this is one corner of that collage of images that harkens back to those mushroom trees that we spoke of, and particularly for a grower of mushrooms, very, very much. It's just I look at this and I see primordial cubensis, the little bitty baby mushrooms that come up alongside the big ones. It's just too spot on for me. On the left-hand side, this image that I love so much, this is a mosaic that's coming out of Italy. It shows Jesus standing between mushrooms. And not only are these mushrooms, but anyone who is familiar with the variety of psilocybin mushrooms would probably, like myself, identify these as psilocybe hugendashi, which is a potent psychedelic mushroom. Now, it's not known to grow in that region, but we do know from uh, some we have some evidence that shows that the um, environmental changes that have happened over the last few thousand years. Different mushrooms have come and gone, psychedelic mushrooms in particular. Particularly, this has been shown in North Africa that is now desert. Again, we mentioned Egypt and the Nile wasn't always a desert. And so it is very, very possible that in Jesus' time, there were other psychoactive mushrooms growing in the area that were of the same complex as psilocybe hugendashi. We have this image taken from a cathedral wall as well that depicts the transfiguration when Jesus revealed his divinity to the disciples. And this is another instance of the tree with the mushroom caps on top. And then probably my favorite, this is a 12th century um, Jesus right in the center, apostles on the sides, and despite having the Son of God in their presence, all they can do is look at his feet. Oh, my buddy Carl, my heart breaks for your website. Um, the I just found this so fascinating that the robes are one of the most common places that mushrooms started to hide in sacred art. And, there's probably good reason for that because, well, where are we looking for mushrooms at? Mostly on the ground. Yeah, there's some that grow in trees, but not psychedelic. Um, and so if it wasn't for the apostles looking at the feet or the robes, then I think we could dismiss this. But there are several folds in these robes that look just too mushroomy. And then when you take into consideration the apostles staring at his feet, and even as well, some of the apostles' feet, I've kind of speculated on this. You can see the robes at the bottom. Some of them themselves even look to be like conical mushroom caps there. So, um, very, very interesting, very compelling. Now, there are some who contend that Jesus, the entire story of Jesus, was a myth written to codify the life cycle and the phenomenological cycle of a psilocybin experience. It was believed for a very long time in Egypt, matter of fact, that mushrooms were born a virgin birth. They born, die, and then resurrect. We see this. The mushrooms come and go and come and go. The mushroom experience itself, uh, it's just too much to go into. But there have been so many times that myself and others around me have had this very, very Christ-like experience where we recognize the Christ within us and become that throughout our experience. Um, there's so much that I could go into there that we'll save that for another discussion. And then what is brings us up to the end of the Bible, the end of the Judeo-Christian text here. Um, some argue where we are today in time. Revelation. Now, it struck me recently that we often understand Revelation purely as the end, um, but the story doesn't actually end at Revelation. That's just the last book that was allowed to be included in this text. I'm going to point out here in these three images of the Revelation, or the Last Judgment, rather, I should say, on the far left. This is post Revelation. We see an angel holding what I think just very clearly look to be three mushrooms. The image quality is a little low on that, but this is this is common speculation among ethnomycologists. And then the other two images are actually of depictions of Saint John, the author of Revelation. All right, let's take the one on the right first. It has Saint John writing. We have see this apparent mushroom, pretty blatant yet somewhat hidden in the image, folded up in the robes again and combined with the table there, looks like. That one's a little more speculative, but I think it's sufficient for me to say that is a mushroom representation. Very obvious is the center image, and why this is most relevant is because of how it relates to the story of the writing of Revelation, not the actually story of Revelation. So this is a depiction of Saint John receiving the revelation from the angel. Okay, now let's see. In the biblical story, Saint John says that he was given scrolls by the this angel that he was instructed to eat, that in his mouth the scrolls were sweet like honey, but they turned his stomach sour and induced these visions. Particularly Amanita muscaria, but even psilocybin mushrooms, when they are young and the caps are closed, there have been numerous times that I've held these mushrooms in my hand and just said, "This is a scroll. This looks entirely like a scroll," particularly Amanita because it has the ring around it, the annulus, and it just looks like a little rolled up scroll. They taste great. They turn your stomach sour. Visions are induced. Another key component to the story is that St. John, when he wrote the book of Revelation, he was reportedly exiled to the island of Patmos. Patmos is an island very close to Mycenae, the mushroom people, the mushroom islands. It's well known that this area uh, grew Amanita muscaria in particular, and probably some psilocybin mushrooms. And so we have this individual who is on this island known to grow psychedelic mushrooms. Um, we have the story of the angel feeding him these scrolls that induce visions and a sour stomach and all that. And then we have this 11th century wood painting here that shows the angel delivering revelation with mushrooms behind him. And if you look there, right to the very behind St. John, you see a few couple more mushrooms there. So I think this is really interesting and really compelling, especially considered in the context of modern day. All right, so I'm gonna just kind of like I'm just presenting some information that I have come across that has it's just been compelling to me, and I feel like there's value in sharing it. Now, just like Sanctuary is not trying to tell anybody what to believe, Eric is not trying to tell anybody what to believe. We're here sharing information, and we can all take with that information and do what we want with it. All right, so a little bit of a timeline here. In 1936, the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie became, well, actually in 1930 is when he was crowned King of Kings. In 1936 is when he was featured on Time magazine as the Man of the Year. Okay, so the Ethiopian kings have, since the time of Sheba, when it is reported that the Ark of the Covenant moved from Jerusalem to Ethiopia to create what's called the New Jerusalem of Lalibela. When um, Haile Selassie was, or I'm sorry, the Ethiopian kings have carried this title of Negusa Nagast, which means King of Kings, Moambisu, meaning conquering lion um, of the tribe of Judah, right? Um, the Ethiopian kingship was directly descended from Solomon and Sheba. Haile Selassie was said to be 225 generations descendant of Solomon and Sheba. So Haile Selassie's crowned King of Kings, Man of the Year. This individual was so impactful on the global stage. It's just impossible for me to really convey it all here. His um, representation at the League of Nations and the United Nations. He was and is the only world leader who ever officially addressed both the League of Nations and the United Nations. There's a fascinating, marvelous history for this individual that I won't go into here. Now, in 1957 is when Gordon Wasson published his article on Maria Sabina. And Maria Sabina did say that the mushrooms told her it was time to reveal them to the wider world. Okay. Um, in Revelation, the only other place where manna, mushrooms, are mentioned outside of the Hebrew Israelite stint in the desert, interestingly enough, when they got the Ten Commandments. But anyway, the only other time that mushrooms are mentioned outside of that story is in Revelation when it says that when the King of Kings comes, that he will present the hidden manna. Like I'm paraphrasing, but that's loosely what it translates into, or says that he will reveal the hidden manna. So, 1930, Haile Selassie becomes King of Kings in Ethiopia and has all this huge impact on the world stage. He is featured as the Man of the Year, and it says that King of Kings, Man of the Year on Time magazine. And very shortly after, Maria Sabina is told by her guides, let's say, that it is time to reveal the sacred, secret mushroom. Is this the hidden manna being revealed? I don't know. Seems very interesting and worth paying attention to. And then I will just have one more image here of the temple in Lalibela. It's not actually Lalibela where the Ark of the Covenant is. It's Aksum is where the Ark of the Covenant is, but Lalibela is considered the New Jerusalem in Ethiopian Orthodoxy. If you notice here, the windows of the temple are very much, if not identical to a psilocybe cubensis. It's impossible for me to see this window and not see a cubensis, from everything from the nipple at the top of the mushroom to the perfectly umbonate cap. It is such a mushroom. Interesting to note, these temples here are built from the surface of the ground down into the ground out of one solid piece of volcanic rock. If you were to see this temple from above, it is in the shape of a cross. There's a network of 12 of these temples, I believe it is, and they're all connected by underground tunnels. Um, the legend in Ethiopia is that the angels helped to build these temples. And in fact, archaeologists have said that it would take something like 50,000 people working day and night for 30 years to actually have built the temples and the um, tunnels that they did. Now, go back to the Egyptian pyramid image that I mentioned, and if you're not aware of what's happening there, the discoveries that are found underneath those temples, it is it is just impossible that they were made by humans. It is impossible. There are structures hundreds of feet down underneath of the pyramids. There's just no way that they were made by humans. So it does beg the question. And again, I ask us, I think that there is significant value in legend, in the stories of our ancestors, and not leaning on our materialist, reductionist ideas of how things must be. We will see that as we look through the artwork from centuries gone by, that there are so many more mushrooms than we could ever have initially imagined. Um, I'm looking for the book here. There's a wonderful book that was recently written. I have it here. I was just looking at it. Tag on it. Um, here it is. The Psychedelic Gospels, by Jerry Brown. An excellent book that goes through religious art through the centuries that depict psilocybin and Amanita muscaria mushrooms. There's just so much more, and I think it forces us to again admit that we don't know what's going on. The last culture I want to look at here, and we could spend an entire 2 hours just talking about the Mayan and their mushroom centered religion. This is the most mushroom centric people that we've ever known of. And interestingly enough, because we always think that we know, when these mushroom stones were originally found in Mesoamerica, the majority of actually all of the archaeologists, except for Stephen Borghi. Oh, I didn't put his name on there right. Daggone it. It's Stephen DeBorgi. Um, all of the archaeologists, except for Stephen DeBorgi, argue that these were not mushrooms, that they just looked coincidentally like mushrooms. And that is what paradigms do, right? Like, just prevent us from seeing what is right in front of us. Fortunately, though, Stephen DeBorgi thought differently. He thought, no, 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 no. These don't just look like mushrooms. These are mushrooms. And I want to know why. Why would a culture have such an obsession with mushrooms? It was the first culture that was ever found to be so mushroom focused. And they literally found hundreds of these mushroom statues. And then as they started to dig into the artwork, finding mushrooms depicted in the codexes and spoken to. And this is where the initial rumors of psychedelic mushrooms, visionary mushrooms, came from, that sent Gordon Wasson on his quest to find Maria Sabina. So we know without a doubt that the Mayan were a highly mushroom centric people. Mushrooms were so important to their spirituality. The conquistadors believed that they were talking to demons by eating these mushrooms. And that is just one more reason that they had to completely wipe out that culture. Thankfully, we had, again, Stephen DeBorgi, who found out the truth here. and depicted that, or helped us understand that the Mayan, the Incan, and the Aztec all had a relationship with psychedelics, but the Mayan in particular were heavily focused on psilocybin. The Mayan were also, to our knowledge, they had the most accurate long-standing calendar. They knew of a solar of an astrological calendar that was 52,000 years, a 52,000 year cycle that the sun goes through. The Mayan knew of this. And they said that they got their knowledge from not from Earth, but from visitors that came to Earth, from the original gods, which again, oh, there's just so much. There's so much here. The Sumerians are a great culture to study in this regard. Um, the Mayans also had very, very serpent centric. You, you can see it here. The very bottom of this temple on the left, those don't look maybe difficult to see, but those are actually serpent heads, snake heads. And at a certain time of the year, solstice or equinox, I can't remember exactly when it is, but at a certain time of the year, certain time of day, the sun hits that staircase in just the right way, and the shadow forms the undulating pattern of the serpent crawling down the stairs. It's fabulous. It's remarkable to see the way that they understood the movements of the planets and times and architecture and intersect of all that was just so fascinating. And these are the cultures that we call primitive, right? Which we're starting to find out how little we know again about that. And so the fleur de lis, the serpent, and the mushroom were all highly visible in Mayan iconography. Carl de Borgi, who you've heard me mention here several times, is on the left here. Now, Carl is the son of Stephen. Stephen went into Mesoamerica, found all this, did all this incredible research, proved that these were mushrooms, and his son followed in his father's footsteps and became an art historian and went around the world and has shown the presence of sacred mushrooms, the serpent, and the fleur de lis in nearly every religious tradition around the world. I found it interesting after many years of conversation with Carl, and having the great privilege of being able to provide him some interpretations and insights into some of this art. Um, he came to the place where he found a door, a bronze door in I want to say Prague or Czechoslovakia. I forget where exactly, but it was this bronze double door that all these images on it that he basically said to me was like the Rosetta Stone of human history. It had everything from the snake, the all the symbols that we've mentioned, and including other tie-ins that I didn't mention that can be connected here. Ritualistic human decapitation, the human sacrifice, the the let's say the metaphorical decapitation, which actually connects to removing the cap and eating the cap of the mushroom, the head of the mushroom. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down there. But he reached out to me and he said he didn't want to ruin his professional reputation, so he was going to see if I might be the one that would help promote this. And I was, but now since the website's gone, it's kind of hard to. Um, but in this bronze door, there was depicted undeniably a spaceship or a rocket ship. And this was from thousands of years ago, right? And so originally he had began his work to show that pre-Columbian circumnavigation of the Earth was a reality, and that is what the persistence of these images around the Earth showed is that, okay, if we have this tradition of divine rulership symbolized by mushrooms, serpents, and fleur de lis all around the world long before Columbus, then we, at minimum, know that humankind has been traveling the entire globe for a very long time. What we're also coming to understand is that these cultures also had tradition of beings coming to our planet and informing us. How does that relate to the mushrooms? Well, remember these guys on the cave walls? Is it really just a coincidence that we have modern depictions of um, aliens looking like ancient depictions of aliens? Um, there's so many more as well. This gets into the stranger territory, um, but it is worth exploring. And as someone who was originally, you know, made a pariah because uh, I was so deeply enamored with psilocybin and, and mushrooms generally, because mushrooms talk to me quite literally. I've been told where to go and find lots of psilocybin when I get there. And as someone who has had multiple internal and external encounters with entities, some of which in the sky, and of those encounters, all of them were shared with others, so they were not just my imagination for sure. Um, Considering the crossover from the geometric patterns, even the insectoid looking creatures that are often depicted on cave walls or in modern day reflections from psychedelic or, um, you know, alien encounters. I think this is one of the biggest questions that we can be asking ourselves. In my mind, we're obviously not alone. Beyond that, what do we do with it? Is there a greater potential for us to work together to improve the planet, to advance the human species? We are members of a galactic ecosystem. Mushrooms invite us to expand our awareness beyond our own kind of basic perceptions and to really consider that the mystery is so much bigger, so much more than we can ever imagine, and that we are active participants in the mystery. So, did the aliens bring us mushrooms, or did the mushrooms bring us to the aliens, or is it all just imagination? I'm not here to tell you that I know because I don't. I'm here to explore with you. I'm here to share in this adventure, and what an adventure it has been. So, I hope you have enjoyed this. Normally, this is where we have questions and comments from live audience. I would invite you to submit any questions in the chat below. You can also reach out to info at Sanctuary. We have a number of free offerings for the public, our primary being our Sunday service on Zoom. You can visit sanctuary.org to get the link there. It's on the calendar. It's actually all over the website. You can sign up for our email list. Um, there's just so much. There's so much more, you all. And I am gonna leave it there. I've talked long enough. I've given you a lot to sit with. Perhaps we'll see you around Sanctuary. If you're a peace-loving person, if you got beef, if you want to start arguments and you want to like just take that somewhere else. We're people that are really trying to bring love into this world on a global scale, and mushrooms are really good at facilitating that. So I hope to see you, and I thank you so much for your time and attention, and much love.